All right, I think we can start now. Maybe more participants will come in during the meeting, but I propose that we kick off. And so good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining this meeting. I'm also very happy to introduce you to today's BiodivERsA webinar on the IPBES thematic assessment on the interlinkages among biodiversity, water, food and health, the so-called Nexus Assessment. Can I have the next slide, please? So several of you might know, you can just continue to the next one. So several of you might know that the scoping of the Nexus Assessment and actually also the scoping of the Transformative Change Assessment was approved last June during the online IPBES plenary meeting. That's basically the meeting where the IPBES members meet and take important decisions on the IPBES work program. And now the IPBES has also launched a call for experts to be engaged in the rollout of these assessments. And so the meeting that we organize today will have a very specific focus on the Nexus Assessment, but many things that we will explain to you are also relevant for the call for experts for the Transformative Change Assessment. Now, the key objective of today's meeting is actually fourfold. Next slide, please. So firstly, we'll give you a very quick introduction to the IPBES itself, so its main functions, but also the key achievements so far. And then we will move to the second part of the meeting, and we will elaborate a bit on the way that BiodivERsA has been collaborating with IPBES over the last couple of years, with a focus on knowledge-centered interactions. And then thirdly, we will introduce you to the Nexus Assessment itself, for which there is indeed now this call for experts, both regular experts, but also for fellows. And so we thought this was a great opportunity to try to mobilize also BiodivERsA project scientists in the process. And then last but not least, we will explain to you a bit the practicalities of getting engaged as an expert. So explaining you also a bit the life cycle of an assessment, the added value of being engaged in a science policy process like IPBES, and also the actual process and deadline for the nomination. And this will also be relevant to the other call that is running simultaneously for the Transformative Change Assessment. And then we have also foreseen 10 to 15 minutes Q&A with the experts that we have with us today. Now, before we start, I would also like to announce that we are recording this meeting. So in case you have any objection, you can just put it in the chat, because we would like to put a replay available on YouTube. So if you have any objection, don't hesitate to let us know. So with this very short introduction, I propose that we just start with the meeting. And for the first talk, we are very happy to welcome Larigauderie, who is the Executive Secretary of the IPBES since 2014. And clearly, Larigauderie is the best place to give you an insight in the platform. And we are also very grateful that she managed to be with us despite a very busy schedule. So welcome, Anne, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hilde, and a very good afternoon to all BiodivERsA colleagues on the call this afternoon. And it's indeed a pleasure to be able to give a few words of introduction on IPBES and some of the highlights of achievements so far. So as this first slide says here, IPBES was established in 2012. As you know, it was very strongly inspired from IPCC. And you can see here that its mission is to strengthen knowledge foundations for better policy through science, of course, with a focus on the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, long-term human well-being and sustainable development. IPBES is what we call an intergovernmental mechanism, which means that its members are governments, and we have close to 140 governments as members so far. And the Secretariat of IPBES is hosted by Germany in Bonn. Next, please. So IPBES has been implementing its first work program between 2014 and 2018. It is finished now, and my next slide illustrates all of the reports that IPBES has produced during this first work program. I hope most people on the call will be familiar with the methodological assessment on scenarios and models of biodiversity and ecosystem services, which was released in 2016. That was the first IPBES report, together with a pollination assessment. And they both were published in 2016. Then we had 4 regional assessment and a land degradation assessment. And then the first work program culminated in 2019 with the global assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services. In the next slide, I make the point that as IPBES has been working on the production of these reports, it has also come up with a number of innovations. One of them, of course, was there at the beginning. It's the conceptual framework of IPBES, which summarizes in boxes and arrows how IPBES sees the world, so to speak. And that conceptual framework is here to really convey a number of important messages in order to produce the work of IPBES. One of them is that IPBES looks at biodiversity through a very integrative eye, meaning that it does not only look at status and trends of biodiversity, but it also looks at the causes of the trends observed. It looks at their impact on nature's contributions to people, and it also proposes options for action. There is also a lot of work that has been ongoing on indigenous and local knowledge, and that conceptual framework also promotes the use of different knowledge systems. And the 5th plenary of IPBES approved an approach to recognize and work with indigenous and local knowledge, which is implemented throughout the work of IPBES. IPBES also has a capacity building program, including, for example, an early career fellowship allowing support for early career scientists to be together with other more established scientists in all of the work of IPBES, including its assessments. And very importantly, IPBES also works with the research funding agencies. It communicates on gaps that are found in knowledge, in the assessments and the other work of IPBES, with the idea that these research funding agencies can then mobilize some funding in order to produce new knowledge for future IPBES report. And BiodivERsA is one of the key successes of this approach, and I'm sure that more will be said about that shortly. Next, please. So during this first work program, 3 other reports were initiated, and they are going to be completed next year or the year after. That includes a methodological assessment on values, as well as an assessment of the sustainable use of wild species. That second one being produced really with the needs of the CITES Convention on the trade of endangered species in mind. And the third one that you see here on the screen is an assessment of invasive alien species, and that would come out in 2023. So all of those are already quite advanced at this stage. In my next slide, I show that in 2019, a new work program of IPBES was approved going to 2030. And the next slide shows the 3 topics that have been approved as part of this new work program. Topic 1 is where we focused our attention today at this webinar. It has to do with looking at interlinkages between water, food, health, and biodiversity, also in the broader context of climate change. Of course, it's a thematic assessment, which we call the Nexus Assessment. Towards producing this assessment, 2 workshops were held earlier and have produced 2 workshop reports, which you may have seen. One on the linkages between biodiversity and pandemics, and the other one done together with IPCC, first collaboration ever with IPCC on interlinkages between biodiversity and climate change. They will contribute to this Nexus assessment. Quickly, topic 2 is about transformative change to achieve the 2050 vision for biodiversity. It will also be a thematic assessment. And topic 3 is more towards helping, supporting the private sector, and it's about measuring business impact and dependence on biodiversity and nature's contribution to people. So in closing, I would really like to encourage you to really apply to be authors on this Nexus assessment. I believe this is our objective this afternoon, to entice you into applying. There is not much time left. I believe the deadline is the 6th of September, so we really need your expertise, particularly when it comes to scenarios and models. We really need a rich pool of experts to tap from for our selection. So many thanks for your attention, and I hand over back to Hilde. Thank you.
Many thanks, I think that was very clear, and I'm sure that it also sparked, I hope, interest from the BiodivERsA scientists to indeed participate in the process. So many thanks again. So now moving to the second talk, and that one will be given by Frédéric Lemaitre, who is BiodivERsA's Science Policy Officer, also based at the FRB. And Frédéric is also in charge of the Technical Support Unit, part-time knowledge generation for the IPBES. And today he will showcase a few concrete examples of collaboration between BiodivERsA and IPBES. So Frédéric, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hilde. Good afternoon, everyone. So the idea of my short talk this afternoon is to contextualize a bit this webinar organized by BiodivERsA. So BiodivERsA is a partnership of programmers and funders of research on biodiversity, ecosystem services, and nature-based solutions, as I'm sure you're well aware. Some of our key activities relevant here are around the development of a shared strategy for research and innovation, for policy and socially relevant research and innovation, strategy which is being implemented then by programming joint activities, including joint calls for research and activities around capacity building for research and innovation actors, especially in working with stakeholders, policy, but also data management. And we also foster collaborations and cooperation between science, policy, and practice through dedicated networking activities and many other. And last but not least, we, as a network of programmers and funders with a portfolio of projects going on at different stages of completion, we work on promoting the uptake of these projects' results and invest in knowledge brokerage. Next slide, please. And these are the key activities, I would say, which feed, which we work around with directly with IPBES, and we actually feed each other around these the different work, and are structured around the four functions of IPBES: assessing knowledge, supporting policies, strengthening knowledge foundation, and building capacity. A few examples of how this works out, plays out in practice. Next slide, please. So as regards assessing knowledge, so the production of assessments by IPBES, it's a two-way street. On the one hand, IPBES provides BiodivERsA, and especially on the strategic programming aspects, input from the assessments, giving the state of knowledge on thematic topics or regional areas in relation to biodiversity. And BiodivERsA fed directly assessments as well with knowledge produced by the projects. For instance, the way we produced synthesized fact sheets for the European and Central Asia regional assessment of IPBES in 2017 was cited as an example by the TSU of how to provide inputs for an assessment. The TSU, the Technical Support Unit, which assists authors in gathering all the knowledge during the lifetime of an assessment. Next slide, please. here to illustrate more the supporting policy and especially supporting science policy interfacing. And we work with IPBES developed tools, especially through methodological assessments and their working groups. And we seek also to support policy relevant research, developing policy tools such as here the handbook on the use of biodiversity scenarios for decision making, which builds a lot on the methodological assessment on scenarios by IPBES, and to which several experts of the task force contributed as well. And the idea here is really to promote the uptake of such methods in decision-making methodologies. Next slide, please. One key function, given the nature of BiodivERsA's programming and research funding work, and which was touched upon by Hilde and Anne already, it's around the strengthening of knowledge foundations. On the one hand, BiodivERsA implements calls for research to fill knowledge gaps, some of which results from the identification through IPBES assessments or working groups, and we build on this for our programming work. And as was mentioned also, since 2019, we go a step further in this collaboration between BiodivERsA and IPBES, as BiodivERsA is hosting hosting the knowledge generation work of the technical support unit on knowledge and data of IPBES. And what this means is that we help animate the process of identification of knowledge gaps during assessments, and we foster dialogues between, based on these gaps, between IPBES experts and programmers and funders of research worldwide to facilitate the uptake of these gaps in future research and innovation efforts. And finally, on the building capacities, next slide, please. So here, BiodivERsA, as I said, invests in developing researcher skills on science policy interfacing. On the other hand, IPBES feeds back also on guidance and tools, as I could explain. And one highlight of work in this area we did a couple of years back when we could still travel was to organize a training session for IPBES fellows based on the BiodivERsA guide on policy relevance, and linked also to this capacity building function. Next slide, please. This anchors a bit the context for how we collaborate with IPBES around these different functions through knowledge aspects. And today we link this webinar a bit under the capacity building theme, as you've understood from Hilde's introduction and Anne's messages as well. The objectives today are to help mobilize experts in contributing to IPBES assessments, with a specific highlight on the Nexus Assessment Scoping or themes that will be covered in this one, and to help you understand how to get nominated and what this implies to become an expert for IPBES. Thank you very much, and I hand back to you, Hilde.
Many thanks, Frédéric, for the very concise overview of the collaboration. And indeed, I think it was a good context for the current call for experts. And now we actually come to the core topic of today's meeting, which is an introduction to the Nexus Assessment. And for this, it's a great pleasure to have with us Andrea Belgrano from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. Andrea contributed to the scoping of the Nexus Assessment, and he's also engaged in supporting the IPBES work at the national level in Sweden. So thanks for joining us today, Andrea, and also for preparing your presentation at such a short notice. So the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. And I'm going to share my screen. Yes, can you all see it?
Yes.
Okay, so good afternoon, greetings to all. My name is Andrea Belgrano, as Hilde just introduced me. So I'm working at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences as an associate professor and I'm as well an associate researcher at the Swedish Institute for the Marine Environments at the University of Gothenburg. And I'm going to present some of the key aspects of the IPBES Nexus Assessment. And the outline of my presentation today is going to be a short introduction on the IPBES Global Assessment, and then going into the Nexus Assessment, the scoping report for a thematic assessment of the interlinkages among biodiversity, water, food, and health. And then I will show you the time frame of this coming assessment. And the information is available at the Annex 1 to the decision IPBES 8/1 on the IPBES webpage. So going back to actually the first kind of presentation of the IPBES framework. So was this paper published in 2017, where the IPBES framework was presented. And this is actually very important because also this coming assessment will actually be based on this IPBES framework. Then the IPBES Global Assessment, in a recent publication in 2019 in Science, outline the key aspect of this achievement through this global assessment. And this is a figure indicating the important indirect and indirect drivers associated with changes in biodiversity. And also the global assessment pointed out the importance of the contribution of indigenous people and local community to biodiversity, which is central also to this coming assessment. And also pointed out that the enabling transformative changes requires innovative governance approaches and organizing the process around the nexuses. So already in this science paper in 2019, Diaz et al. Laid down the foundation for preparing these two coming assessment, the nexus and the transformative change. As we move now into the more details of the nexus assessment, so the nexus assessment is also looking more specifically to the interlinkages among biodiversity, as well as climate change, adaptation and mitigation, including relevant aspect of the energy system. So this aspect is not specifically in the actual title of the assessment, but is well embedded in the guiding documents for the expert to actually develop this assessment work, water, food, and health. So basically, it's very important to try to assess biodiversity from the functional aspect of biodiversity in relation to climate change and the interlinkages to the socio-economic complexity embedded in this work, and also, as I said earlier, to the IPBES nature contribution to people framework, looking at valuation and also governance system. As we're looking now into the Nexus Assessment document, the part A is the scope of this assessment, and the biodiversity and nature contribution to people being fundamental to supporting these Nexus interlinkages, addressing all the elements and the interaction of the IPBES conceptual framework, as I mentioned earlier, fully recognizing and consider different worldviews and different knowledge systems, including science and indigenous and local knowledge system. This was part of an intense discussion during the IPBES Plenary 8, addresses the interlinkages among biodiversity, climate change, adaptation, and mitigation, including the relevant aspect of the energy system, water, food, and health, and will consider also holistic approaches based on different knowledge systems. Also, the scope of this assessment will be to highlight threshold, feedbacks, and resilience in the Nexus linkages, as well as opportunities, synergies, and trade-offs between different response options, and will evaluate the role of the most important direct and indirect driver of change, also based on the results from the global assessment, the role of both formal and informal institutions, impacts of the pattern of production and supply and consumption on nature, contribution to people, and good quality of life. The timeline and the geographic coverage of this assessment will be global in scope, but highlight inter-regional and sub-regional similarity and differences, and will include terrestrial, freshwater, and marine ecosystem. I particularly highlighted here the marine system because now I think they are much better captured in this document as previously, and we really hope that in this assessment, the role of the ocean will be really taken into consideration and play a large part of this coming work. The time frame of the analysis will cover the past in the last 50 years from the Industrial Revolution from around 1500 or as far as back as appropriate, as you will have data and information to actually look at this future responses option. And also the projection will be kind of up to 2050 with the possibility to actually consider longer future time horizon up to 2100. The assessment will be also conducted over a 3 years period of time from the initial start of the assessment to the end. In the contents of the policy, the intended user includes governments, relevant multilateral environmental agreements, other multilateral organizations, academic organizations, the private sector, the civil society, including indigenous people and local community and non-governmental organizations. The assessment is also expected to inform other national and regional and global policies on the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, ecosystem, and their contribution to people. Important, the policy content will be really linked to the part 2 of the assessment, which I will present shortly, which is called Pathways to Sustainable Future. And in this part, there are specific questions outlined in point A to G, which will be directly linked to this policy context of the Nexus Assessment. So as we move to the methodological approach, it is really important to state here in the very beginning, for the purpose of this assessment, the actual, let's say, how biodiversity is defined in this content. So in this content, biodiversity is defined as the variability among living organisms from all sources, including terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes on which they are part. So this is the definition of biodiversity for this assessment. Climate includes the global climate system and its interaction with human activities, comprising climate change, adaptation, and mitigation, including the relevant aspect of the energy system, as I mentioned earlier. Water includes all forms of surface and groundwater, and the biophysical and human processes and systems that regulates quality and quantity and distribution and use. The food includes the full value chain for all cultivated and wild foods, fiber, feed, lumber, and industrial feedstocks from production to consumption and disposal. Health includes human physical and mental health, well-being, how infectious diseases emerge from the wild, including the role of human activity in their spread and the system related to the prevention, treatment, and management of diseases, and is addressed using frameworks such as the One Health or the holistic approaches. As we move to other aspects of the methodological approach, the Nexus Assessment will include a summary for policymaker and highlight the key policy relevant findings and a non-prospective policy option for a wide range of end users. This is important because by no all means, this document is not to be prescriptive, but actually is a guiding document to provide the lead author that will be engaged for the different chapter, how to go about to actually run this assessment. So it will reflect the comprehensive analysis and the current state of the scientific knowledge and other knowledge system, including the indigenous and local knowledge, performing the chapter and summarize knowledge gaps and future research needs. The assessment will also identify key knowledge gaps in different areas, given the potentially strong interlinkages between the plan IPBES and Nexus Assessment and their transformative change assessment. The two assessments will be complementary with the transformative change and will not try to duplicate the information, but rather to kind of work together and try to establish some synergies between these two assessments. Going in now to the chapter outline is the Nexus Assessment is basically divided in two parts. The part one will be focused on the framing the Nexus and the holistic approaches, and the part two will be focused, as I mentioned earlier, on pathways for sustainable future based on different knowledge systems. I will try to go rather quick here, not to go into many details. So the chapter one will basically introducing the Nexus. Chapter two will be the status and past trends of basic interaction in the Nexus. So will be this kind of a dual interaction, like biodiversity and climate change mitigation and adaptation, biodiversity and water, biodiversity and food, biodiversity and energy, and biodiversity and health. So here is important, this aspect, because as I mentioned earlier, is not captured totally in the title of the assessment. But here, as you can see, the expert will have the full possibility to look at the interlinkages of biodiversity with all the nexuses. Chapter 3 will present the status and past trend of the complex interaction in the nexus. And chapter 4 will look at future interaction across the nexuses. And this also is important because it will be kind of an exploratory policy screening and target seeking defined according to the IPBES assessment of scenarios and models. As we move now to the part 2, the pathways to sustainable future, this part 2 will address the possible pathways and range and to realize a range of sustainable future, drawing from the analysis in part 1. One of the key aspects here is chapter 5, which is related to the policy and social political option across the nexus that could facilitate the transition to a range of sustainable future. So this chapter, we basically define what transformative change means in the context of the present nexus, and will assess the utility of different theoretical and practical frameworks for implementing sustainable management approaches, either to transformative change based on different knowledge system, or through identifying other approaches to management, policy, and social political option. So as you will see, all the other chapter that will come now will actually be based on what evidence will emerge from this chapter 5. Chapter 6 will look at the option for delivering sustainable approaches to water. Chapter 7 will look at the option for delivering sustainable biodiversity related approaches to climate change, adaptation, and mitigation, including relevant aspects of the energy system. Chapter 8 will look at the option for delivering sustainable food system. And this chapter will also consider indigenous and local knowledge relevant to food system, examine how to alter food demand and consumption, and how to increase diversity in food consumption to ensure equitable access to healthy diets. Chapter 9 will look at options for delivering sustainable approaches to health, and will address the response option that can be implemented by health actors to create the changes outlined in chapter 5. Chapter 10 will look at options for delivering sustainable approaches to public and private finance for biodiversity related element to the nexuses. And again, also chapter 5 will address the response option, which will be outlined in chapter 5. Chapter 11 is particularly interested for me, coming from a marine ocean background. So option will deliver option for delivering sustainable approaches to biodiversity conservation, restoration, and sustainable use. And in particular, response option consider may include the potential of nature-based solution, ecosystem-based approaches, and other response options such as Mother Earth, right-based approaches, green and blue urban spaces, terrestrial freshwater and marine spatial planning, the creation of effective and sustainable management for protected area network and ecological corridors. So this basically in chapter 11 is expressly stated the link to marine ecosystem. Chapter 12 will be the summary and consistency of option knowledge and technology gaps and capacity development. The Nexus Assessment will draw on data and information from a diverse knowledge system and languages, including scientific literature and indigenous local knowledge, addressing all the components of the IPBES conceptual framework. Specifically, attention will be given in accordance with the platform's data management policy to ensuring access to metadata and wherever possible, the corresponding underlying data to a findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable fair process. So all the data and all the information behind this assessment will be open access available through the FAIR principle. Again, covering the capacity in building and the development, the capacity building activities will help to support the development and the uptake of the assessment. And the activities will be designed in accordance with the objective 2 on the building capacity of IPBES work program up to 2030. The communication and the outreach access, the Nexus Assessment report and its summary for policymaker will be published in electronic format and made available through the IPBES platform. Technical support will be obviously available and composed of several full-time professional and administrative staff members, and the unit will work closely in collaboration with the group's expert producing this assessment. And now we come to the proposed time frame for this assessment. And basically, in the year 1, which is the second quarter of 2021, the plenary and its 8th session approved the undertaking of the Nexus Assessment. Now in the third quarter, the multidisciplinary expert panel select the assessment co-authors, coordinating lead authors and review editors in line with the procedure for the preparation of the IPBES deliverable. In the year 1, 2021, the fourth quarter, the selection and decision communication to nominees. Then basically in the first quarter of year 2, 2022, the assessment will start and will also be the preparation for the first order draft, which will be sent for external review for a period of 6 weeks. In year 2 will also be the preparation of the second order draft, which will be sent out for external review for a period of 8 weeks. And then in the year 3, there will be the final review, final draft chapters, which will be made available for policy maker and for review by governments and experts. So all more details of this time frame are available in the Annex 1 to the decision IPBES 8/1. And I want to also highlight again the role of the ocean for life on Earth and human well-being. It's just a call to different ocean people out there to kind of try to engage in this assessment. The ocean carry out 50% of the primary production on Earth, supply 20% of intake animal protein to more than 3 billion people, and support the greatest biodiversity on the planet. So I truly hope that the marine ecosystem will be well covered and experts will engage in this assessment. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any question. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrea. That was all very clear. And as you mentioned, the scoping report was actually the result of a very intense discussion at the IPBES 8, but at least now we have a clear outline of what is expected to be a major IPBES deliverable that will also be of relevance to different processes, including the SDGs and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the Paris Climate Agreement and other processes. And indeed, we will take a few questions towards the end of this meeting. So, but people can already put a few in the chat if questions pop up. And so this brings me to the last speaker, who is Reiner Stotke, working as program manager at PTDLR. That is one of BiodivERsA's partners. And like many of us, Reiner is also heavily involved in supporting the IPBES process at national level, so in this case, Germany. And he's also very close to the nomination process and also to the experts themselves. So we think he's very well placed to elaborate on the life cycle of an assessment and also on the process of recruiting experts. So Reiner, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hilde. I hope you can hear me well. Yes, getting involved in the Nexus Assessment. You see here on this slide, the process in producing an IPBES assessment is rather elaborate. In this snake-like presentation here, you see several steps involved here, which can be assigned to different bigger steps. The first is the request and scoping of the assessments in the upper figure. Then the expert evaluation, the evaluation done by the experts themselves. Third is the approval and acceptance of the final assessment report. And finally, the use of the final assessment findings. I will focus today on step 2, the evaluation by the experts, which comprises, of course, a lot of steps here. It begins with the nomination and selection of experts. We will talk today, followed by the establishment and management committee and the technical support unit. Then several other steps like the outline and zero order of the draft chapters, internal peer review, first order draft chapters, external expert peer review, and then an iterative development of the chapters and the summary for policymakers drafts. This will followed by the review of drafts by the governments and relevant stakeholders, which go to the development of the sorry, I can't see my own presentation here, which is followed by the development of the final draft chapters and the summary for policymakers, and then the final drafts validation and the submission of comments to the final drafts. Okay, so there are very many steps here. Next slide, please. What is interesting to be engaged as an expert? Of course, there are many aspects. We put here only the main aspects which may be relevant for you. Of course, it's a unique learning experience if you're engaged as an IPBES expert, being engaged in a science policy interface with a high impact at national, regional, and of course global level. But there are lots of networking opportunities with other experts involved here. Engaging as an expert gives you the opportunity to build new partnerships, maybe also to build new projects resulting from the collaborations as spin-offs. it gives you the opportunity maybe to produce high impact publications. And of course, IPBES creates a unique momentum in the scientific and maybe broader community. Okay, next slide, please. We put here several citations from Sandra Jacobs, who's a coordinating lead author of the values assessment and who also participates in one of BiodivERsA's funded projects, Open Gaia. Engaging as an expert gives you the opportunity to learn, of course. You can learn from top scientists in your field. You can learn from other disciplines, what they bring and interact. You can learn from indigenous knowledge and the challenges of integration of their knowledge. You can learn about the policy process and the position of science, etc. But engaging as an expert gives you also strategic value, or productive value. You have the opportunity to build a huge network and to participate in this huge network, maybe for potential collaboration in research projects, which may be followed by impactful publications, of course, adding formal expert level to your badge in your CV, and which of course has a big impact maybe for your scientific career. And thirdly, engaging as an expert can give you personal satisfaction, of course, because the work you do makes sense as a scientist, not only working for scientific value and publications, but also make a difference in biodiversity implementation on a global level. Okay, next slide, please. What different type of contributions can you have as an IPBES expert? Of course, you can work as a chair or co-chair for an assessment. There are only few, but you can also work as a coordinating lead author, or you can also work as a lead author, or maybe also a fellow, a young scientist working similar as a lead author. Okay, I'll come to this further on. Next slide, please. The type of contributions for IPBES experts, the nominated experts should have a strong multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary expertise, which is the expertise in one or more disciplines of natural science, social science, or the humanities. But experts may be also indigenous or local knowledge experts, or have expertise in indigenous or local knowledge systems. We put here several disciplines. Disciplines can range from environmental to ecological to social science research to economic research and interrelations among biodiversity. But also in one or more elements in the nexus, because experts should have insights into water, food systems, human health, and climate change mitigation adaptation aspects. Okay, next slide, please. So the type of contributions, as I already mentioned, experts can engage in as a co-chair to these assessments, and a co-chair normally the work is shared between 2 or sometimes 3 experts. The co-chair's role is assumed as the responsibility of overseeing the preparation of an assessment report, as well as its summary for policymakers, of course, and to ensure that the report is completed at a high standard and addresses the key scoping questions. So the co-chair usually is a senior in the field and has experience in coordinating the work of experts. But besides this, the co-chairs are assumed to oversee the development of the assessment and to contribute, and also, to contribute maybe to the text and to one or more chapters. So the co-chair is responsible for collaborating and coordinating with the coordinating lead authors, of course, to ensure that the chapters are delivered in time and with a high standard and addresses the key scoping questions. And finally, the co-chair chairs will ensure that the chapters feed into each other and that the messages they transport are not contradicting. Okay, next slide, please. Then the coordinating lead authors. A coordinating lead author's role within an IPBES assessment is to assume the overall responsibility for coordinating a chapter of the assessment report. Coordinating lead authors have the responsibility to ensure that chapters of a report are completed to a high standard again and are collated and delivered to the report co-chairs in a timely manner and confirm to any overall standards of style set for the document. Thus, their role is to coordinate the work of the lead authors within a chapter, the fellows, and the contributing authors, which are involved in that chapter. And of course, to ensure the quality of the chapter as a whole. Coordinating lead authors also play a leading role in ensuring that any cross-cutting scientific, technical, or socioeconomic issues of significance are fulfilled, that yes, the section of the report are addressed in a complete and coherent manner, and of course reflect the latest information available. So coordinating lead authors coordinate yes, to pull out the key messages of the chapter, and of course also to write the executive summary of the chapter. So coordinating lead authors contribute to the writing of the summary for policymakers. Next slide, please. And finally, the role of lead authors. Their role is to assume the responsibility of producing designated sections or parts of chapters that respond to the work program of the platform. Of course, also on the basis of scientific, technical, and socioeconomic information available. Lead authors typically work in small groups that together are responsible for ensuring that the various components of their sections are put together in time, and of course also in a high quality, and that they meet overall standards of style set for the document. The essence of the lead author's role is to synthesize material drawn from available literature or other fully justified sources, but also that contributing authors, stakeholders and experts where appropriate. Lead authors can identify contributing authors who can provide additional technical information or graphics maybe, or specific subjects covered in the chapter. Yes, what I didn't mention with the other different roles, lead authors are expected to contribute 15% of the working time to produce the relevant sections dedicated to their chapters. And they are also expected to participate actively in author meetings. The other roles, the coordinating lead authors are deemed to contribute to 20% of the time. The co-chairs are deemed to contribute to 25% of the working time. So you see there's a slight difference between them. And next slide, please. And now the fellows, these are similar to lead authors, but they are usually young researchers. This is a program existing since 2015. The selection criteria are a little bit different. Usually there are 2 or 3 meetings dedicated for fellows at IPBES to meet other fellows, and each fellow is associated normally with a co-chair, a coordinating author or lead author to better integrate within the work at IPBES. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, here you see the process and the deadline for nominations. Usually have to log in first if you haven't already done this. Then you have in a second step to apply and choose a nominator. Usually nominators are the national governments or organizations at national level. You see the very tight deadlines to keep here for authors around 5th September, which is approaching very soon. And for fellows, it's around the 20th September. This process is followed by the application validation, which is for authors already at 13th September and for fellows on the 27th September. And then there will be an elevation of nominations, which results are expected around November 2021. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, here you see a screenshot of the IPBES website where you have to log in. Next slide, please. The process and deadline for nominations. You can apply and indicate a nominator, as already said. Please be sure to keep the deadline here. The dedicated web portal. You can do this through the dedicated web portal. The deadline is 13th September, and usually you have to complete the application form. Then, of course, attach your CV, which should be around 3 to 5 pages maximum in English. Here it is good to add some lines as a summary of your background, of course, and you should confirm that you have no conflict of interest. Which is important. You will have to indicate the nominating government or organization as the nominator. So be sure to be in line with the national guidelines here. You can see below the respective websites here as a link. Okay, next slide, please. Then focus on the nominators. In many cases, countries have an internal selection and validation process in which the applications are screened. So it's always good, of course, to contact your national focal point or the respective organization which is responsible to work here in the process. You can find here in the link, if you don't know who's your national focal point, addresses and names of the national focal points. And of course, be sure that the deadline is kept, which is already September 5th. Okay, next slide, please. And then the application validation, the nominating government or organization, the nominator, indicates which nominees are supported, and if you apply via the portal, the nominators and the nominees will receive an email with a link to the nomination form, and will be invited to approve and submit the nominations on the web portal. Okay. Yes, next slide, please. The evaluation of candidacies. Then the selection process is in the hand of the multidisciplinary expert panel at IPBES, who will make the selection based on several criteria. Next slide, please. And yes, finally, is there a financial compensation? This is, of course, important for maybe many of you. At the moment, IPBES is not paying experts from the Occidental Western regions where all contributions are deemed to be in kind, but some governments or organizations are covering maybe travel expenses for their experts. So again, check with the national focal points in this case. Okay, next slide. Okay, thank you very much. If you have questions, and I think you will have, please use the Q&A button below here, and we are happy to receive your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reiner, for explaining indeed the assessment process in a nutshell. And as you mentioned, it's quite a complex process with different steps. So this also means that experts can get engaged in different phases of an assessment. And also there are indeed different level of engagement. And although it might sound a bit like overwhelming, we know from experience that the experts that kind of engage in the process and that put forward their nomination, that they are guided very well throughout the process. So they get some kind of a training, and there's also a guide to IPBES assessments where you will find all the details of all the steps that we've now briefly summarized. So there's a lot of information available. So it's more the question of kind of putting yourself forward and giving it a try. And indeed, we can now answer maybe a few key questions. And I will give the floor back to Cécile Mondot, who will moderate the Q&A, and I'm also available to answer some questions if you have them.
Okay, thank you, Hilde. So we have received a question from Mohamed Tahiri, who is asking about open calls. It should appear in the future. I would like to know how to be connected to a network of appliers. So I don't know if you want more details on the calls to answer that question, or do you want to answer this one, Hilde?
Yes, so there are several things. I don't know if you mean to get information on the calls that IPBES is launching, because for that there are several ways to get this type of information. First of all, I would recommend interested people to just register on the IPBES website and to also follow the social media, because through that channel you will get the official updates. And then, of course, also there's an open-ended network for stakeholders that will re-advertise these notifications. And also then at country level, you have the national focal points that will also do their own communication. So there are definitely many channels to get the information of opportunities. But then when it comes to getting to know who else is engaged or who else is applying, that is actually information that is not publicly available unless these experts are selected. So once experts got through the whole process and once they have been selected to be part of an application of an assessment, then their names will be published on the IPBES website, and then you can see who is actually doing the work. But as you can imagine, in the nomination process, there are really hundreds of experts that submit their application. And then the multidisciplinary expert panel is then trying to come up with the best combination of experts based on expertise, gender balance, geographical balance. There are all types of balances that come into play. But the list of all these applicants is not, to my knowledge, not publicly available. So I don't know if that is answering the question.
Thank you, Hilde. We have also another question from Pierrette Nukas. Could you please explain shortly as example German nomination process to also get insight into a national process? So maybe a Rainer, I don't know if you feel more familiar with the German process.
Yes, the nomination process in Germany, actually, we had a meeting today, this morning, according to the national nomination process. We had a deadline which is already gone, unfortunately. It was the 20th of August. Usually, experts or yes, candidates have to apply to send this to the national IPBES coordination office, and then there is a committee meeting which actually was this morning, and this committee selects the experts nominated on the national level. And this will be done through the process I presented in my presentation before. However, you have also the possibility to be nominated by your organization you're working for. So maybe a scientific organization like the Helmholtz centers or the Leibniz centers, for example, and they can nominate you on their own. This is also a possibility, a second possibility. So not nominated on a national level, but from that organization. But you have, of course, to stick to the deadlines I presented. Okay, I hope this answers the question for Germany, except.
Thank you, Rainer. We also have another question in the Q&A regarding fellows. Can someone over 35 but below 40 apply to be a fellow? I got my PhD 5 years ago.
Yeah, I can take this one. I just checked, so it's indicative. It's indicatively up to 35, and PhD is 5 to 7 years ago. So my advice would be you are eligible, and get in touch with your national focal point about your potential nomination.
Yeah. Thank you, Frédéric.
Another question, if you like, in the asking if it's the governments who select lead authors, etc. And so to make it clear, governments nominate candidates, and the candidates are then selected by IPBES, and in particular through deliberation of the multidisciplinary expert panel of IPBES.
Yes, so indeed, so it's like several phases. First, you put forward your nomination, and then you hope that your government or another organization will actually endorse, support your application. And if that is done, you will receive an automated email saying, okay, now your nomination goes to the IPBES multidisciplinary expert panel, and that is where the actual selection will happen. So it's not because your organization, because an organization or your government has endorsed your application that you will be doing the actual assessment. Then there's another step at the level of IPBES where all the applications come together, and then the actual selection happens. But it's important that your government or an organization is supporting your application. You cannot just take the initiative yourself and say, oh, I'm a good expert and I should be part of the pool. So there's a bit of a screening up front.
Yeah, maybe we have Andrea Belgrano who is raising his hand. So
yeah, I just wanted to maybe pose a quick question of clarification to Rainer. I just wondering if, for example, when the process of the final acceptance of the different nominated people will be done by the MEP, I just wonder if what will be, let's say, the lead author of a chapter, if we'll be in the position to recruit potential contributing authors who didn't actually make somehow the deadline for this nomination and so forth. I don't know if there is a process that the lead author can actually, let's say, scoop out more if he needs to get more people involved. This I'm not sure. I just wonder if you maybe knew. Thanks.
So if I'm informed correctly, the deadline or the timeline actually for the MAP, the multidisciplinary expert panel, to select the final composition of experts is in November this year. But maybe, of course, the more leading roles for reports are already fixed at an earlier stage, of course. But the lead authors, I think, will be selected in November this year. Maybe Hilde, you can complement this, but
no, I indeed normally, so the multidisciplinary expert panel will look at the applications somewhere mid-October, and then the outcome of the selection process will be known quite soon, because they want to really set up the assessment quickly. But that's also as far as I know myself.
Okay, thank you both. And maybe we can pick one last question. So is it possible to be nominated by a national focal point whose nationality you do not share, if we have actively participated in the research in that country?
I can maybe take that one if you want, because that really depends on the country. So in that case, I would recommend people to just contact the national focal point. For example, if you are have a German nationality, but you would like the Belgian government to support you, then I would recommend you to really contact the national focal point of Belgium and to ask about their rules, because there can indeed be some national rules. Some governments will only support their own residents, but other governments are a bit more flexible, and they also support other nationalities, or they support also from international organizations. So I think it really depends a bit on the country. So I think the best you can do is just contacting the national focal points up front to inquire. And the list of national focal points is actually available on the IPBES website, so you can just see who is responsible in each country and just send these people a message, and normally you should hear back from them. So it really depends on the country. And then I also saw maybe one more last question. There was also a question on if you can apply for both calls, if you feel that you have the expertise. There's actually no rule, to my knowledge, there's no rule saying that you cannot apply for both. But the thing is, of course, if you apply for to become an expert, that if you would get selected, then the idea would be that you really engage properly in the whole exercise, and it's quite time demanding. So I think it's more a question of, would you be able to manage two processes simultaneously? That's quite challenging. But there's no strict rule that says, okay, if you're in one assessment, you cannot be in another one. So, but I think it's more a question of, is it feasible to imagine that you would be selected for both to really do it properly? So, and it's also not that your chances would be double if you kind of do it for both. I think the selection process for the Nexus assessment is independent from the one of the transformative change assessment. I don't know, Cecile, maybe we can also quickly give the floor to Marco from the European Commission, because he also indicated an opportunity in the context of Horizon Europe.
Okay. We also had Frederic who wanted, who was raising his hand. So I don't know if it was related with what you were saying.
Indeed, it was related. So please give Marco the floor.
Is Marco with us?
Yes, but I have to give him the...
It's
gonna take...
Thank you.
Okay, I think anyways it's mainly to highlight the opportunity shared in the chat and the Q&A from the European Commission's research framework program, Horizon Europe. There is a topic supporting the generation of knowledge on Nexus and transformative change, which is an excellent opportunity to contribute to the topic, and also likely being part of a consortium may advance application as a IPBES expert, I think is the point Marco wanted to raise. And you have the link and information in the chat and in the Q&A.
Indeed.
Yes.
Ah, you're there. Yeah.
No, no, I'm there. Thank you, Frederic. No, you said it very well. Just to underline, it is independent from the IPBES process, but if you look at the topic, it has the same content. So it might be very interesting for an expert to look whether part of a consortium would help this expert first for generating knowledge, to access the knowledge, and also these projects normally they have a budget of a few million euro, would possibly help you as well with the, let's say, the indirect financial support to work in the IPBES assessments. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. And there are indeed also other opportunities in the context of Horizon Europe related to the IPBES. So people who are interested in this type of processes, there are now many opportunities to get engaged. So I don't see more questions. Do you see, Cecile? Did we miss out on some questions?
I don't think we miss any questions. So we are happy. I hope you are happy with the webinar.
All right. So maybe we can close indeed the meeting because I see that we have already passed the hour. So maybe just 3 quick things. So first of all, we indeed remain available. If you would have any question on the process, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. As I mentioned, many of us are also engaged in a national process. So even if it's not always the same between countries, I'm sure that we can guide you through or direct you to the right people. So please don't hesitate. I would also like to thank the speakers of today's webinar. So Larigauderie, also Frédéric, Andrea, also Reiner, and of course also all the colleagues that helped to set up this webinar at a rather short notice. And then also, as I mentioned, the webinar is recorded, and so we will make the replay available on our YouTube channel. So that might also be an opportunity. If things went a bit quick, then for sure you can just replay at your own speed. And we can also share that with you, with the participants, and we will also, in the message, we can also share a web link where you can download the guide to the IPBES assessment. So then you can look into the different steps of an assessment process in more detail. So that's actually a very good resource that was produced by the IPBES itself. So with this, thanks again for joining this meeting, and I wish you a very happy rest of the afternoon. So see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.